Welcome to the Metal Gear community. Now, if you're new here, I'm willing to bet you just finished one of these games and you're wondering what you should play next. If so, you've come to the right place. I'm going to be showing you what game you should play next, regardless of what game you played first, and I promise that by the end of this video, the Metal Gear series won't seem as confusing, and you'll be confident in your choice of what game to play next. Let's get into it. First things first, if you have this console, you're pretty much set. All you need is a copy of the Legacy Collection and you've got all the games that I'm underlining in this image. You can even get these last two on PS3 if you wanted to, although I don't really recommend that since the last gen and the PC versions are superior. Also, get used to seeing this image as I'm going to be using it a lot in this video. Before we move on, a small disclaimer on the Legacy Collection. If you buy it secondhand, this game, Metal Gear Solid, is a download code. It's not included on a disc, so it might have already been redeemed if you bought it secondhand as mentioned. Just keep that in mind. Now, for everyone else that is either on PS4, current gen, or on PC, one of the easiest ways to play some of these games is on the recently released Master Collection. You might have heard people talking about it disparagingly, but I can assure you as someone who owns 4 different versions of this collection, has clocked in over 500 hours playing this collection, has platinumed all of the games with trophies twice over, and is still playing it on pretty much a daily basis, this collection is an excellent starting point for someone new to Metal Gear. Keep in mind that the Master Collection Volume 1 goes on sale all the time on all of the platforms it's available on. With the Master Collection, you're able to play these games, which are the first 5 games in the series. Of course, you are also free to emulate the games if you're on PC, whether it be the PS2 versions or the HD/Legacy Collection versions on a PS3 emulator. More on that a little later. Now that you know where you can play the games, let's go over how they're played in the correct order. Let's take a look at our trusty image again. The games are placed in what we call order of release. This is the correct way to play through the mainline Metal Gear games. My suggestion, regardless of where you started, is to go back and play this game here, Metal Gear Solid. Now you may be asking yourself, what are the 2 games that seemingly come before Metal Gear Solid then? These games are Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, and they're kinda old. They're not bad games by any means, but the first game in particular suffers from the same antiquated video game design philosophy that something like the original Legend of Zelda on NES suffers from. It's a bit difficult to get through without a guide, and to be completely honest, there's not a lot of lore here. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, on the other hand, definitely has more lore and story beats to it. It helps flesh out Solid Snake as a character and helps give some perspective on the type of man that he is by the time that you play as him in Metal Gear Solid. The game is also easier to figure out compared to the first Metal Gear, and overall gameplay is much more akin to what you'll experience with the rest of the series going forward. Here's the thing. Technically, these games come before Metal Gear Solid, and there are some references to them throughout Metal Gear Solid's story. However, I suggest that you skip these games for now for a couple of reasons. The first being, as mentioned, these games are definitely from a different time. They're much harder to figure out than games are nowadays. They don't feature any cutscenes or voice-acted dialogue, and the gameplay, especially in the first Metal Gear, is super simplistic, and as a result, most people that start with these games don't end up sticking with them all the way through. I just don't want your first impression of Metal Gear to be a frustrating one. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to show you something that most people don't even know about that will help you if you're feeling as if you're missing out by not playing these first 2 games. Let's go back to the game I suggested you start with, Metal Gear Solid. Within its main menu, you can find the previous missions option. If you select this, it will actually give you a summary of both Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. While it's not the same as actually playing through the games, it will at least give you some context to who Solid Snake is, and it also goes over the most important events that took place in these games. I would also take the time to check out the briefing files before you start your first playthrough of Metal Gear Solid, as they will also help fill in the gaps and flesh out the scenario you're about to find yourself in. With all of that out of the way, you're ready to start your Metal Gear Solid journey. For those who want some spoiler-free tips for the first Metal Gear Solid, I made a whole video going over some of the basics that will help you during your first playthrough. You can check that video out if you're interested, so in this video, I'll keep the one tip that I have for you short and sweet. And that tip is, don't be afraid to play the game on easy. Metal Gear Solid controls nothing like a modern game. All you're doing by bumping up the difficulty, or even just by playing on normal, is making the experience even harder than it has to be your first time around. Most people are really only in it for the story the first time around anyway, so until you get used to MGS1's gameplay, I recommend sticking to easy difficulty. For those who really just want to blow through the game and only care to experience the story, you can even play on very easy difficulty, which is a difficulty setting exclusive to the integral version of Metal Gear Solid. This version was released for the first time outside of Japan via the Master Collection Volume 1, and it's included alongside the regular version of Metal Gear Solid. And for those who really just cannot get over the gameplay or even the graphics of Metal Gear Solid, the Legacy Collection and Master Collection Volume 1 both include the digital graphic novel retelling of the events of Metal Gear Solid. I highly recommend playing the actual game, even if it means suffering through it, over this option, but for those that for whatever reason just cannot get through MGS1, this option is always here. From here, things are pretty straightforward. Continue your series playthrough by playing Metal Gear Solid 2 and then Metal Gear Solid 3. MGS2 should absolutely be played right after MGS1, since the two games are so closely intertwined both from a lore perspective and from an overall narrative perspective. Trust me, Metal Gear Solid 2 will hit home so much harder if you play it right after MGS1. When it comes to MGS3, even if you started with Metal Gear Solid 3 like a lot of people weirdly suggest you do, I would replay it now that you've experienced MGS1 and 2 so you can fully appreciate some of the Easter eggs and nods to those two games. After MGS2 and MGS3, the series playthrough can get a little complicated. This is because Metal Gear Solid 4, the next game on our list, is technically only available on the PlayStation 3. For this exact reason, most of the hardcore Metal Gear fanbase is hoping to see this game as a part of the next Master Collection. As of right now, it's unfortunately mostly stuck on the PS3 jail it's been stuck on for years. I say mostly stuck because you can emulate MGS4 on PC via a PS3 emulator. Just keep in mind that this requires a pretty decent PC build and also knowledge on emulation or the time and patience to learn how to configure the PS3 emulator to your specific PC. And even then, the game is prone to crash at times. Sadly, most people will have to skip this game if they don't have a working PS3 or aren't willing to buy one. If you find yourself in this specific situation, feel free to move on to Peace Walker. While not as readily available as games such as MGS1, MGS2, or MGS3, if you don't have a PS3 with a copy of the HD or Legacy collections, you can play this game on a PSP emulator, which can pretty much run on a toaster nowadays. By tweaking some emulator settings, you can probably get it looking just as good, if not better, than the HD collection version. The only less than optimal aspect of emulating Peace Walker are the controls. The HD collection version of the game makes use of the dual analog sticks controllers have nowadays. Peace Walker originally released on the PSP, and you actually had to use the face buttons on the PSP to move the camera. You might be able to bind the face buttons to the right analog stick on your emulator and have it play similarly to the HD collection version, but either way, Peace Walker isn't as fast-paced or mechanically intensive as the other games you played up until this point. Despite some fans not enjoying Peace Walker because of how different it is to the games in the series that came before it, Peace Walker's story is integral to the next couple of games on our list, which are actually two parts to one singular experience. Those games are Ground Zeroes and The Phantom Pain, which together make up Metal Gear Solid 5. As mentioned earlier in the video, you can purchase both of these games on consoles as far back as the PS3 and Xbox 360. If you have something newer like a PS4 or an Xbox One, I would definitely go for those versions. Better yet, if you have a PC, and even if it isn't a great one, you can go for the Steam versions of both games that are incredibly well optimized and run like a dream. They also still look amazing despite the games being almost 10 years old now. At this point, whether you started here and these games are what hooked you into Metal Gear, or you ended with these games by following your first order of release playthrough, this concludes the mainline or canon Metal Gear story. From here, you can either go back and play through Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 if you skipped them at the beginning, or you can explore some of the spin-offs such as Metal Gear Rising. Hopefully getting through the games wasn't too painful, and hopefully my explanation on how to play the games in the correct order wasn't too tedious either. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and let me know what inspired you to get into Metal Gear in the first place. If you want some spoiler-free tips to get your Metal Gear Solid journey off on the right foot, make sure you check out this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.